High-end Androids always have a rough time here at Retro Resolve. That's because despite some of them being decent, what often happens is we get OK tech mixed with a fairly ludicrous price tag. The Logitech G Cloud, great screen, but it has an expensive identity crisis. How about the Razer Edge? Solid tech, but it's frankly full of bizarre design choices. When Android devices fall into the same price ballpark as PC handhelds like the Steam Deck, they need to do something more compelling to make the device more attractive. I simply can't recommend either the G Cloud or the Razer Edge over something like the Steam Deck. When it comes to tech, support and feel, the Steam Deck is the clear better choice. How does the Android-based Pimax Portal fit into all of this? Pimax has avoided most of the common pitfalls. The device hasn't been rushed to capitalise on a trend. The tech inside is more powerful than its other Android rivals, and Android as an operating system has been tamed to make it feel more like a home console experience rather than a fancy tablet with a controller shell. Simply put, the Pimax Portal is the gold standard of Android gaming and an example of how to do things with care and consideration. I'll tell you something for nothing, you won't make it through a Pimax Portal review without getting a Nintendo Switch comparison. From the detachable controllers to the 5.5-inch screen, which is the same as the Switch Lite, all the way to the square game scrolling on the main home screen, the Pimax was clearly inspired by the Nintendo Switch and wanted to make something similar. This is where the care and consideration come in. The Pimax Portal isn't a Nintendo Switch ripoff. It's taken the inspirations and updated and improved on them. Take the detachable controllers for instance. The Pimax Portal doesn't feature rails of any kind. Instead, Pimax went with some super strong magnets that snap the controllers into place whenever they get near the console. The magnets are so strong, in fact, they come with a warning to avoid injury. Yes, you heard that right. I haven't hurt myself yet, but it's something you'll need to be aware of. Notice the yet. This minor change makes playing with the Pimax Portal all the more fluid. I can quite literally just bend the controllers off and magnetically connect them back together to form a regular controller whenever I want to switch to a docked setup. It's just like the Switch, only more advanced in that regard. In the hand, the Pimax Portal's Switch Lite size makes it easy to hold and play on. It's not like the Steam Deck or even the ROG Ally where it's quite cumbersome to manoeuvre around. At 367 grams, it feels really light as well. All of the smaller touches result in a handheld that's comfortable to hold and surprisingly intuitive. If comfort is the main concern, the Pimax Portal makes multiple smart choices, and the result is something that instantly feels like a solid purchase. Emulation is without question the Pimax Portal's strongest suit. It's a very capable machine that's only limited by the state of individual emulators. I've tested multiple games from different systems to get an idea of how far I can push the Portal. As expected, everything up to Dreamcast runs without any problems. That's kind of a given nowadays though, isn't it? It's when we move on to the more CPU-heavy emulators that the Pimax Portal surprises. Dreamcast, PSP, GameCube and PS2 run almost flawlessly. PS2 era games, you can even up the internal resolution, meaning those 480p PS2 games, they now look stunning in 1080p. Widescreen and 60 frames per second patches also work great on the device. So where's the brick wall? The Razer Edge managed to play some low-end Switch titles before reaching its limit. The Pimax Portal, meanwhile, manages to almost break through that wall. Low-end Switch titles can hit 60 frames per second on the Pimax Portal with ease. But it's the more advanced titles that show just what the handheld is truly capable of. Any problems here aren't down to the Pimax Portal itself, it's the state of the emulators. The device was able to breeze through games like Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe and Super Mario Odyssey showed promise, but was hindered by the emulator running into problems. Oh well. It's the same for Pokemon Legends Arceus. It could run at 25 frames per second in Skyline and even higher than that in Yuzu, but Yuzu doesn't load in the textures correctly. 25 frames per second may not sound all that interesting, but it matters. That's because it shows the tech inside the Pimax Portal isn't the problem, it's the emulators themselves, which in their defense are still very new to the Android scene. The Portal has the power, we just need to wait for the emulators to catch up. If I do have one obvious complaint with the Pimax Portal, it's the lack of built-in support for Android games. Thanks to the power of the device, Android games run smoothly. Whether that's Genshin Impact at high settings or Call of Duty Mobile, the Pimax Portal has enough power to run the most played games with ease. And thanks to the 4000 mAh battery, you can easily get over 2 hours of solid playtime before you even need to look at how much power's left. Emulation manages about 90 minutes for Switch games, by the way, just in case you're curious. Despite having 18 buttons on the front of the handheld, the controls work well for what they need to do. I'll always prefer concave thumbsticks to convex sticks found in the Portal. I said the same thing in my ANEO Pocket Air review, but that's personal preference. Convex for racing games, concave for everything else. So, where do things go wrong? Well, the controls are comfortable and responsive for the most part. A lot of the main games don't work unless you map the controller manually. Call of Duty wouldn't even detect the controller that was connected, and Genshin Impact doesn't actually feature controller support yet on Android, I know. The problem just keeps popping up on most of the Android games I tried. Now, in Pimax's defense, they have included a brilliant piece of software for mapping screen areas to buttons, and the result doesn't produce a massive amount of input delay, but it's a chore to set this up for the games. There is a cloud option to download pre-built custom profiles as well, but I haven't been able to get that to work. Is this a deal breaker? It all depends on your usage. It is frustrating needing to do this, but it's hard to hold Pimax responsible for the crimes that are normally coming from the developer, although that's on a case-by-case basis. The main thing for me is that Pimax knew this would be an issue and intended a way to solve it, i.e. the on-screen key mapper. One thing I will say is Xbox Cloud Gaming works nearly perfectly. The app recognised my controller and I was straight into playing Starfield in a matter of seconds. Lag and input delay weren't issues for me, and I was able to play it smoothly in a completely different room to my modem setup. But, of course, all of this depends on your internet. Microsoft recommends speeds of 10 megabytes on mobile devices and 20 megabytes if you're playing on a console, PC or tablet. So take that with a pinch of salt, yeah. So, onto Android. The Pimax Portal uses a modified version of Android 10, and in my experience it's the most user-friendly version I've used to date, and even friendlier than the ANO Pocket Air, and that's saying something. Apps are displayed in little boxes from the left to the right of the screen. It's like the Nintendo Switch. Scroll to the furthest right and you'll get an option to view all the apps. That's where you can change from 1080p at 60Hz, 1080p at 90Hz, 4K at 90Hz, and so on and so on. What Pimax has gone with is something that's easy to navigate and understand. As many Android users will tell you, the moment you open up the settings menu, you're swamped with a ton of superfluous options. There's way too many. On the Pimax Portal, this has been simplified so all the important and relevant stuff is always just a click away. All of the Android handhelds I've reviewed come with a custom version of Android, but I'm besotted with what Pimax has cultivated here. It's simple but luscious and puts everything you need front and centre rather than buried under different settings and headings. If you're new to the Android ecosystem, the Pimax Portal is super easy to understand. So let's talk specs and price. I won't bore you too much with the specs of everything, but there's some things that are worth going over. The Snapdragon XR2 is more powerful than the Logitech G Cloud's Qualcomm Snapdragon 720G thanks to its higher cache size, TDP wattage and G-flops. Yeah, don't worry, it's not going to make sense. In simple terms, the Snapdragon XR2 is a VR-ready chip, meaning it needs to be powerful to accommodate for how much extra stress comes with running games in VR. In terms of power, it's one of the best out there, including the ANEO once again. In terms of pricing, the Pimax Portal comes in at $369 for the 8GB of RAM version with 128GB of storage, $399 for the 8GB of RAM with 256GB of storage, or $549 for the QLED version with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. That was a mouthful. For this review I was sent the 8GB with 128GB of storage, so I wasn't able to test out the QLED screen, and I'm still waiting on a headset to test with it, so hold your horses on the VR stuff. It's not often I say this, but the Pimax Portal is an Android device I can thoroughly recommend. It's a mix of power and smart design that really makes the thing come alive. It feels great to hold, the magnetic Joy-Con style controllers are excellent, and the power of the device puts it in a different league to what came before it. The minor problems and annoyances are there, but they're not as pronounced as with the other Android devices. You'll spot them, but they won't leave you questioning why you bought the device in the first place. If you care about power and value for money, and you want an Android device that can run almost everything you throw at it, the Pimax Portal is the current industry standard to beat. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave me a comment and a like, and if you want to, you can sub to the channel. Thanks, I'll catch you next time.